Hey guys, what's up? So I stumbled upon an old email, and let me just read it to you. It says, "Hurry, this item ends soon, don't let it get away." So it was from eBay, and you know when sometimes you're looking at a listing for a long time, and you click on it a few times or whatever, then they'll send you kind of a nudge email, and they'll be like, "Hey, did you forget about this listing? You know, go buy this thing." So that's what this email was, and it was from January 8th, 2012. And it was for the listing titled Magic the Gathering 1x English Chains of Mephistopheles Legends UP to near mint. Can't remember what UP means. Was that unplayed or maybe it's like slightly played? Either way, it was a good condition Chains of Mephistopheles for, that's fucking $40, you guys. 40 US dollars. Oh my god. That is just insane to think about. So for those that are not familiar with Chains of Mephistopheles, it's a 2 black mana enchantment, and I'm not going to get into the specifics of exactly what the card does. I will go into the details of exactly how the card works at the end of this video, so stay tuned if you are interested. But for now, I'm just going to quickly say that basically it shuts off everybody from drawing extra cards. It's kind of like Leovold's Emissary of Trest in the way it works, like sort of, you know, like resembles it. Each opponent can't draw more than 1 card each turn, except Chains of Mephistopheles is global, it applies to everybody. And that's just an oversimplified version, of course, and it also has a really good interaction with Anvil and Bowgarden, as I've talked about in my top 10 most expensive cards in Visions video, which will cause everybody to draw 2 cards and then discard 2 cards on their draw phase, giving them a net card advantage of 0, and potentially effectively locking everybody out of the game. So a really strong card, and as you can see here by this screenshot from Star City Games, taken today, it's a $1,000 card now. That costs over $1,000 frickin' dollars. So, yeah, just kicking myself. Like, why didn't I order that card? I was really close to ordering it. You know, I went to the listing multiple times. I got that email, which is evidence of that. And I remember thinking this is a really cool card and I wanted it, but I was but a young teenager at the time, and I don't remember why I didn't buy it, but maybe I missed when the listing ended. But anyway, so it's not all bad though, because I went back and I looked and I saw, okay, well, it says current price, and it looks like this was actually an auction. So it's not like it was $39.99 buy it now price, right? So I thought, okay, well, probably ended for a lot higher price than that, and I probably didn't miss out too much, right? I probably couldn't have saved that much. But then I went out to MTG Goldfish and looked at the price around 2012, which, I don't know if you can see in the corner there, yeah, it was only 70 bucks back then. So that means, you know, around the maximum that I would have paid probably would have been around 70 bucks, maybe 80, which is still just ridiculously cheap compared to what it is now. And yeah, another thing just to rub salt in the wounds is that the exchange rate for Canadian and US dollars at the time, I'm Canadian by the way, was really good. It was like 1-to-1, which meant that I could order things online without having to pay extra money if I'm taking it from the US, if I'm ordering it from the US. As shown by this chart from xe.com, it was very sort of even around that time, 2011, 2012 sort of thing. And now it's quite a lot worse at 1.33 Canadian dollars for 1 US dollar. That is a screenshot from today, and that's actually pretty decent. That's pretty good, you know, and it's not good. And so that means that for me, a Chains of Mephistopheles would actually cost approximately $1,450. So that's more than 20 times the price for me today. And so, you know, keep kicking myself harder. I'm just like, why didn't I buy it? Why? But, you know, at the end of the day, it is kind of 20/20 hindsight, right? I mean, nobody really could have predicted accurately that this would happen. There was really no telling. And everybody's got 20/20 hindsight, right? So it looks like I found in some more emails that what I did end up spending the money on was, I don't know if you guys can see on the camera there, MTG Zendikar Swamp 241 foil full art land, MTG Zendikar Plains 230 foil full art land. And I mean, I thought this was a really good investment at the time. I don't really blame myself, right? I was relatively new to Magic. I'd only started like late 2010, and I only started really getting into it maybe 6 or 7 months after that. So I was relatively new to things, and I thought this was the next big card to buy because of the unhinged foil full art lands, which were, I think, some of the only foil full art lands other than the Zendikar ones at the time, and they were worth quite a bit of money, like 40 or 50 bucks, and so I thought, whoa, like I should invest in these Zendikar ones because they're cheap right now, they just came out, and they might go up a lot in value in the future, and boy was I horribly wrong, unfortunately. Wish I would have bought the Chains of Mephistopheles, because they ended up reprinting, or sorry, I should say, they ended up printing more foil full art lands in Battle for Zendikar a bunch of years later, which totally tanked the price of the original Zendikar full art lands, and they even made 5 of them with the exact same art. And so this didn't end up being a good investment at all, and they're not really worth very much more than they originally were. I mean, they are a little bit, but of course, it's nothing in comparison to how much more of the Chains of Mephistopheles would have been if I would have just bought it instead of those foil full art lands. Don't let it get away. That's literally right on the email. Why did I let it get away? Why didn't I listen? No, but at the end of the day, it's not the end of the world, you know. And also, when I was scrolling down on the email, you know how they have those like suggested, like, oh, if you're not interested in that anymore, why not check out these listings, right? Because they're trying to get you to use eBay more and spend money on it so they make money. So I found another listing too on that same email as well. I don't know if you can read this, but it says 2x Gem Mint Liliana of the Veil MTG card Innistrad Mythic ×2. So for 2 copies, buy it now for 55 bucks. And that got me thinking, you know, I can't believe how much the prices of all Magic cards, not just reserve list cards, not just super uber old cards, have gone up in the past, you know, 5 years or whatever, or even in the past 2 to 3 years for some cards. Like Liliana of the Veil on Star City Games right now is $99.99. $100, $100 for a single copy, and that was 55 bucks for 2 copies back in 2012, which is absolutely insane. And you know, I was reading on the MTG Wiki that the modern format was officially codified on August 12th, 2011, so that got me thinking, like, well, Modern has increased a lot in popularity, so it makes sense for cards like Modern Stables to be worth quite a bit of money. But then it really just seems like every Magic card is worth a ton of money now. It just seems like Magic cards in general are incredibly expensive, and I guess that's a good thing because it means that Magic the Gathering is a lot more popular now, I suppose. You know, there's a lot more interest in the game. But at the same time, I can't help but reminisce about the good old days when $70 was considered expensive and people were complaining that it was a lot to pay for a single piece of cardboard. You know, and nowadays it's like you have to sell your car if you want to build a freaking deck with all these expensive cards in it. So it's definitely a different world now than it was back then. I actually went on hiatus around 4 years ago and then came back around 1 year ago, and even in that 3-year period I just thought it was absolutely crazy how much the prices of a lot of cards had gone up. You know, I remember people saying back in the day, like, oh, revised dual lands are never going to be worth a ton of money because, like, they're washed out and they look horrible, and look at it now, right? So anyway, that's about it for this, and now I'm just gonna basically explain in depth, in, you know, somewhat depth, what Chains of Mephistopheles does and some interactions with it and everything, because I ended up doing some research on it. So for those of you who are curious about that, stick around, otherwise feel free to click off now. So Chains of Mephistopheles, is a 2 mana, 1 colorless, 1 black enchantment, and the card itself reads, every time a player draws a card, that player must first discard a card from his or her hand. If there are no cards in player's hand, take top card from library and place it in the graveyard instead of drawing. This enchantment does not apply to the first card drawn by a player during the draw phase. So, first of all, I think they could probably tell this card was getting way too confusing as they were designing it, because you can see they omitted a few like connecting words to probably try and reduce the word count on the card and the really small text size as well. And the modern updated Oracle version of the card text is, if a player would draw a card except the first one they draw in their draw step each turn, that player discards a card instead. If the player discards a card this way, they draw a card. If the player doesn't discard a card this way, they put the top card of their library into their graveyard. That's really freaking confusing. So I tried to simplify it for you guys a little bit. basically, the normal draws in everybody's draw steps are still completely normal. So on the beginning of your turn, you still just draw a card and there's no penalty, nothing happens. Your next turn, you just draw another card, totally fine. But if you would draw any extra cards, that's where this Chains of Mephistopheles effects come in, and there are two modes to it. So if I were to draw, let's say, one extra card for whatever reason on top of my draw step draw, and I had cards in my hand, then instead of drawing, I would have to first discard a card, and then I would get to draw. So it becomes like a red looting effect, kind of, and you end up with no card advantage by the end of it. You discarded one, you drew one, so it's like, in some senses, you could consider it no benefit to draw, but of course there is the benefit that you get to see a new card. Maybe you didn't want one of the cards in your hand, so it's not all bad. But the second mode is that if I have no cards in my hand, and then an effect causes me to draw, then I would simply put the top card of my library into my graveyard. I wouldn't do the discard and draw thing. And so I think the effect that they were trying to get when they designed the card back in 1994 was that no matter what happens, there would be a net zero card advantage if you tried to draw outside of your draw step, right? So if they didn't put that second clause where you mill the top card when you have 0 cards in your hand, then what would happen is you would discard, you wouldn't have any to discard, and then you would draw, and you would end up with 1 extra card. And so to prevent that, that's why they had the 2 modes, and I'm sure they didn't have nearly the development teams that they do today to make cards a lot more simple and elegant, and so that's why it ended up being so weird and confusing to achieve their desired effect. Another interaction that I can explain with this card is what happens when you draw more than 1 card at the same time, right? So let's say you have an effect that makes you draw 3 cards. Do you discard 3 first and then draw those 3? So how exactly would those sort of things work? The example I use is Brainstorm, also because I want to highlight how ridiculously neutered this card is by Chains of Mephistopheles and why you should never cast it if there's a Chains of Mephistopheles on the field. So for those unfamiliar, Brainstorm is a 1 blue mana instant that makes you draw 3 cards and then take 2 cards from your hand and put them on top of your library in any order. So let's just walk through. If there was a Chains of Mephistopheles on the field, you had 4 cards in hand, one of them was Brainstorm, you cast it, now you have 3 cards in hand. So the draw triggers are essentially separate. So you do each trigger separately, so I would discard a card, draw a card, so that's the first card, and then I would discard another card and draw a card, that's the second card, and I would discard a third card and draw a card. So I'd end up with no card advantage there, but then the rest of Brainstorm's ability would finish resolving, and I would still have to put 2 cards from my hand back on top of my library in any order. And so I would go from 3 cards to 1 card, which is really bad. So don't cast Brainstorm. Don't make that mistake if somebody has a Chains out, because it will backfire on you. This card was also featured on Channel Fireball's Magic TV Top 8 of the Week, entitled Most Confusing Cards, released in 2012 as a testament to the complexity of Chains of Mephistopheles. One more thing too is I read an article released in 2004 on Star City about what would happen if there was more than 1 Chains of Mephistopheles on the battlefield. And it was so funny, as I was reading it, they were saying that they were getting a lot of questions, like a lot of people asking what would happen if there was more than 1 Chains of Mephistopheles, and all kinds of questions about this card, and it just got me thinking, like, man, what a different time that was back then. Like, I have never seen more than 1 Chains of Mephistopheles in the same place at the same time. I probably will never see more than 1 Chains of Mephistopheles in the same place at the same time, because they're a $1,000 card now. So that was kind of funny, reading that little tidbit of history. But basically what the interaction was and how they explained it was it does not create an infinite loop like one might think, so you don't end up discarding and then drawing and then having that draw replaced by another discard and draw effect, and then that draw replaced by another discard and draw effect, etc., ad infinitum. What actually ends up happening is, so for example, let's say you have 4 cards in your hand and there are 3 Chains of Mephistopheles on the field, and you went to draw 1 card, you would go to draw it, but then instead you would discard and go to draw another card, and then instead of drawing that second card, you would discard and go to draw another card, and then instead of drawing that third card, the third Chains of Mephistopheles would stop you and force you to discard another card, and then the third Chains of Mephistopheles would finally finish triggering and not be replaced by a different Chains, and you would get to draw the final card. So the net effect would be discarding cards equal to the number of Chains of Mephistopheles, and then drawing a single card at the end. And then also, let's say you have 1 card in your hand and there's 3 Chains of Mephistopheles on the field, and you draw another 1 card. What would happen is you would go to draw it, then you would discard the card in your hand instead, and then you go to draw the second one, and it would be replaced with a mill, and then you wouldn't mill again. So let's say you have no cards in hand, you wouldn't mill 3, you would only mill 1, because the effect is only replaced once, and normally what happens is the part of the Chains of Mephistopheles effect that causes you to then draw a card becomes replaced by the next one, which becomes replaced by the next one. So if you just end up milling a card, there's nothing for the other ones to replace, and only one trigger happens. So there's a little interesting tidbit of trivia that will probably never come in useful unless you're willing to spend a hell of a lot of money on Magic, or maybe you're playing a proxy deck or something like that, but still interesting nonetheless. So yeah, that about wraps up this video. Let me know if you guys have any similar stories. Are there any moments that you're really kicking yourself about that you wish that you bought a card in the past and now that card happens to be worth a lot more than it was, or any other regrets that you have about your past in Magic, any other decisions that you wish you made? Definitely let me know in the comments. I love to hear about it, and I think that those stories are becoming quite common now that Magic the Gathering card prices are so absurdly ridiculous. This has been Collectible Squash. Hope you enjoyed the video. Feel free to subscribe if you want to see more, and I will see you in the next one.